Hi, welcome everyone. I hope that I think we're actually recording, we're good. Welcome to what is effectively the week 4 Zoom recording for the AOD and Homelessness Community of Practice. I would like to just start with a very quick acknowledgement to country, and whichever country you might find yourself on watching this video or participating in this video. To just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, custodians past, present, and emerging, and just give due recognition to the fact that this land was never ceded, and to, I guess, keep in mind the strength, the resilience, the courage, and the hope of Indigenous people to continue their quest for sovereignty, and I guess the other recognition of the ongoing impacts of colonisation and intergenerational trauma that we see, so how we can work more effectively to help close that gap. So my name's Naomi, and I am a workforce development project officer here at VADA, and just coordinating a lot of these activities. And I'll let Olivia and Danielle introduce themselves, and then we can get cracking.
All right, I'll go first. Your mic's muted, Danielle, sorry. I'm Olivia Nichols, and I am the clinical consultant for Odyssey in community services across the Northwest region. And basically my role is around access. So I look after intake and assessment. I run some programs as well. Anyone who was there at the Making Links talk would know that there's lots of options, and access, although daunting, can be flexible if needed. Today I'm going to talk about motivational interviewing, but first I'm going to throw it over to Danielle to introduce herself.
Thank you, Olivia. Very briefly, I'm Danielle. I was also at the Making Links Forum. So I work for Launch Housing, which has a number of offices, but one of those is an entry point in the Northwest Lasn, so that's Launch Collingwood, homelessness and housing service. I work in service development, which supports all of our programs, their policy, their training and that, but previously I worked frontline in the IAP service, managing team, coordinating a drop-in service. So yeah, I'm here to answer any questions about housing responses, possible housing pathways, and after this session we'll follow up with a little bit on one of the tools that the housing sector uses and how you can use that tool if you have the time and capacity.
Cool, thank you. Well, I'll hand over to Olivia now, because Olivia will be giving us a rundown on I guess the techniques, theory, and the application of motivational interviewing and how that's applied within an AOD context. Danielle might jump in towards the end of that with some examples of how the housing and homelessness sector use motivational interviewing. And then we'll pick up where we left off last week and continue on with a bit more of a case study to just talk through where possible opportunities and intervention and access to services or referral to services. So take away, Olivia.
Aha, well, hello and welcome. I know that if you're beaming in, I'm happy to answer any questions, and that goes for Danielle and Naomi as well. If you think that there's anything that people would like to hear, and I haven't quite covered it, then give me a little poke and we'll go down that path. I think today, we're going to talk about motivational interviewing, and the reason why we're going to talk about that is because it's pretty simple to do and anybody can do it in terms of other service providers. So as housing workers, there's lots that you can do in terms of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is particularly useful if you've heard about the stages of change, and I'll just revisit that in a tick just quickly. Then it's particularly useful when somebody is pre-contemplative, so they're thinking their use is fine and good, or contemplative, and that's when they're starting to think that maybe something needs to happen. The idea with motivational interviewing is that it would assist you to I guess, work through the stages of change and come to a place perhaps that looks like a more functional use or perhaps abstinence based on what you are interested in. I think we'll start first just with a little picture. I'm going to share it. And this is actually just a quick one about stages of change and what it looks like. You can see this just here. As you can see, I'm going to run my cursor over, and you should see my cursor, that should be there. That we start with pre-contemplative, and it says here, what problem? As when people use, and although the people around them might see that it's perhaps dysfunctional, or maybe it's not dysfunctional, but there's no problem. And so that might mean that, for example, I'm a young person, I binge on the weekend, I drink a whole slab plus half a bottle of scotch. I think that that's fine, and there's no problem. Now, people around them might see that it's perhaps not fine because they have to take maybe 2 days off work, or perhaps are in a super bad mood, or perhaps get into a fight, or that perhaps the relationships aren't working so well at that time or soon afterwards. So that would be our assumption, or our, I guess, judgment that it's not working for that particular person. But despite that, that's called pre-contemplation, where people don't see that it's an issue at all. Remember that not all drug and alcohol use causes people problems. So that might mean that somebody who uses various substances, for example, various substances, but it doesn't affect them in terms of their money and their relationships and their housing, their ability to work and their mental health, then there could be, we talk about harm minimization rather than an abstinence model for drugs and alcohol. Then we move into contemplation. So you move from that's not a problem into this isn't going so well for me. And you can see it just here. There's some questions being raised. So that's contemplation. Maybe it's not too good for me. Then there is, and we're adding the other special elements, for example, a decision. So it's not so good for me. I'm not really ready to change it. And then I decide that it's shitty and I'm going to change. And then you would move into action, which is I'm starting to do something about it. And that might be accessing AOD services or stopping by yourself or something like that. And maintenance means that you're continuing to use or not use in a way that you're happy with. And then, of course, people relapse. Now, this can go over and over again. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit about how motivational interviewing fits within this, because I know I spoke about stages of change last time, but they really do go hand in hand. So if someone's got pre-contemplating, then you would use motivational interviewing to create insight. And if they're contemplating something, then you would use motivational interviewing to create a decision or a desire to change. So moving right along, let me just stop sharing with you. I'll show you my face instead, which is always exciting. Now, so can you see me now? Beautiful. All right. So when we talk about motivational interviewing, and I'll show you a little bit of things here, I was wanting to ask you to invite you to think about any time that you have had to make a change yourself and the process that you went through to make that change. Now, this change could have been easy, or it could have been a more difficult change. And the sorts of things that you might identify is, okay, why did you make that change? What made you think that you needed to change or wanted to change? Why did you make that change? And what helped or hindered in that? So if you have a little think for just a few seconds about that, I think that would be useful, because then it makes it relatable. So I will just I will show you this. So what is change? It occurs over long periods of time I'm sorry, I can't show you this screen at the moment. It often includes multiple attempts and treatments. So basically what I say, that anything between now and where you're happy or recovery is a good practice. And you might notice that people who smoke cigarettes will start again and stop again and start again and stop again, and then they'll achieve a period. Usually for people smoking cigarettes, it's abstinence, or sometimes it can be that they're a social smoker instead. So that's what I talk about in terms of everything between now and recovery is a good practice. Now, your good practice could be just making one phone call to a AOD treatment service. Change consists of self-change and involves other changes in psychosocial functioning. What is motivation? Motivation is quite personal and belongs to you or to your client, and this is about your own or their own process of change. It can be enhanced or hindered by interactions with others. That includes people like you and people who are working in services, but it can also be family, and it can also be friends around. And if you can think about as well, times where you've seen people and perhaps they've been ready to change and motivated to change, but perhaps they met with, relationships are always difficult, aren't they? Where they may have met with somebody who's a user, and therefore that has hindered their motivation to change, because now they've got somebody that close to them that they use with regularly. In terms of enhance, we hope that with our work at your level, at our level, that what we do is actually enhancing motivation. So that would mean, but we can always also hinder it, and we would do that not on purpose, of course, but if you use words like should and those sorts of things, or that's not good, or those sorts of things, then it creates a stigma and a shame, and therefore I guess it could hinder somebody's recovery. But we'll talk about that in just a tick. Motivation, we talk about readiness to change. So change will only occur when somebody is ready. So that means the timing is right. When someone's willing, that they believe that change is preferable, and if they're able to change, like what circumstances are around them that would help them to change. But also there has to be a level of confidence when you are wanting to change. So if you feel like you're ready to change, but you don't think you can, then that's an issue with, even if the timing's right, if you're willing and if you're able, if you're not confident to make the changes, then it's going to be very difficult for you to do them, because as you know, it's difficult to try to do things if we're not feeling confident. For example, I've got 2 legs. I can run and I can jump, but I don't feel confident about doing a high jump, so I probably wouldn't attempt to do a high jump. And if you could think about it that way, then that's a good example. I do want to show you, let me see. I'm just trying to, anyway, sorry, I can't share this with you. I'm obviously a noob at doing these sort of things, but you will find that with the opposite of motivational interviewing is saying something like, I think you should stop drinking. I think you should stop drinking. Even if you say it beautifully, caringly, you might get a response that says, I think you should shut the fuck up. Excuse French, but that's what we often see. So let's take away the shoulds and start to make it about somebody's power and the way that they would approach this, which is you would have a collaborative conversation style, and that's in order to strengthen somebody's own motivation and commitment to change. The plan is to be guiding rather than teaching and telling, and this helps explore and resolve ambivalence as well. So there's a whole lot of ways that we can communicate, and we're helpers, so we want to fix stuff, right? So usually it's around providing advice. With motivational interviewing, particularly around substance use, what you're talking about is creating a conversation, and you're taking out the advice bit, you're taking out the you shoulds, because that doesn't work well. As you know, there's always I guess, if you think about it, if I say that don't look at the yellow balloon, what do you look at? You'll look at the yellow balloon, you won't look away from it. So if you say you should not drink, or I should not eat, or I need to be on a diet, I shouldn't have Tim Tams, all I can think about is Tim Tams, yeah? So that doesn't always work. What we want is for you to listen and to understand, and respectfully refrain from adding your own content as well. You could say things like, and I know that this isn't really around having a therapeutic relationship, because the way that housing workers work many times is time poor, right? So this is about snatching opportunities, because you might be the only people that they talk to in terms of services, snatching opportunities to do some motivational interviewing, which could take all of 2 minutes, yeah? So things that you could say is, of course, you've heard about reflective listening, right? Everyone's, you'll listen, and then you reflect on what they're saying. Okay, you've told me that you really like Tim Tams, I'm hearing you, but I'm hearing that's posing a problem for you, and you feel uncomfortable with that, rather than saying, oh yeah, you eat too many Tim Tams, I think you should stop, have you seen this diet? It doesn't work like that. So let's do some empowerment. So we might say, look, we trust your own wisdom, we'll stay with you and help you to work it out in your way. So you've kind of got to find that middle line. A good listener also offers expertise when needed. However, if you don't have that expertise, it's all right. You don't need to know what acceptance and commitment therapy is. You don't need to know what CBT is or anything like that. This is about using what the skills that you've got, the opportunity you've got, and the opportunity you've got to make referrals. If you think about it, it's like a GP. Housing services get hit with a lot of stuff, people who are unwell, people who are substance affected, people who have poor housing, people with terrible relationships. And GPs don't expect to know everything. They don't expect to know everything. What they do is they refer out. They refer out to a dietitian or a dermatologist and those sorts of things. And I think that's where the role for housing services might be. People usually get stuck when they don't appreciate the downside of their situation. So that's called ambivalence. So I guess what you could do in terms of ambivalence is, we often talk about using a decision change matrix. It's super easy. It's called pros and cons, and everyone's done pros and cons, right? So you don't need a sheet for it. You've got a piece of paper. You could use a scrap this big, but ask people to write down their pros and cons. Okay, what's working for you? What's good about your use? And what's not so good about your use? And by doing that, you might find that you're inviting some, I guess, some insight. You're creating insight into what's not going so well for them. So it might be that, all right, when I use ice, then I've got lots of energy and I feel good. And when I use ice, then I get cross, or the come down is terrible, or it's expensive, or those sorts of things. So the pro is that I feel energy and I feel invigorated and I feel happy. But the con is that the come down is horrible, it's expensive, and it's getting in the way of my relationships. And then you explore, all right, so how is it getting in the way of your relationships? And that creates even more insight, but also creates, I guess, an awareness of exactly how these things are affecting you. I guess when you're talking about engagement, look, this is stuff that can be done in 2 minutes. I know to people that have perhaps not had a lot of a lot of experience, but who are busy or who are problem solvers and fixers. I'm certainly a fixer. Then the you shoulds and taking my my advice tends to be the way that we go first before inviting somebody else's, I guess, reflections or insights or those sorts of things. Now, it's okay to sit with somebody who's pre-contemplative, because if you've started to invite just a little bit of thought, then that's, you know, the start of a journey, and that's all you need to do, really. I think that when you're talking about motivational interviewing as well, what you're talking about, the skills are open-ended questions. We all kind of know about those. Don't do yes nos because you won't elicit information, and we want to make it a conversation rather than because that works better. Affirmations, so knowing that you're doing well, or that you're doing well with these particular things, are important, because that will increase confidence. And if people's confidence is increased, of course they're going to be more motivated to change. You do reflective listening, and then you summarize. I think that what you could do here is also create goals. So maybe somebody has decided that things aren't going quite so well, that they're contemplative, and you've done a little bit of work with them. So you might have done decision change matrix. You might have done, what would that look like if things changed in this way? How confident do you feel about it? How do you think, what would work for you, do you think? You know, those sorts of things. All right, so what would work for you? All right, so they're the questions. All right, so what would work for you? What do you think would work for you? All right, so what do you think you could do? What's something little that you could do? And that might be, let's have one less bong at night. And those sorts of things. So you make it so that then you're moving into the action phase, right? So you're thinking about how to change and what you would need to do to change. And that means that you're moving into contemplation, from contemplation into action, if it starts to work that way. So you've gone from contemplation through to decision, and that's I'm going to change. And then you're doing the action part of it. So what you would do there is, okay, just as I said before, okay, what do you think would work? Okay, what goals do you think you'd like to set? So that's asking them to set their own goals. So you don't say, all right, so this goal I think would be really easy for you to do. Let's cut down to, let's try to get off cannabis. Why don't you go to your doctor? That's not their goal. This is our goal. We have to remember that we've got whose agenda is it? Is it their agenda or is it our agenda? So what you would do then is create goals. They have to be doable. So there has to be that they're particular. So for example, having one less bong, rather than just saying, okay, have less bongs. That doesn't give you a particular goal to aim for. It could be, then you would say, all right, what would help you to smoke less bongs? Oh yeah, make a smaller mix. That's a great idea. So that's what we're asking them to come up with their own answers, because that would be meaningful to them. Then you could ask them, all right, so what would make this difficult, and how would you be able to help make this work? So that might be, all right, so I know if I smoke bongs with Basil, we go all night. How about if I set my alarm and I leave Basil's house at 10 p.m. And that will help, because we know that that's sometimes a blocker. So then that's got to be, and then there has to be confidence. All right, how confident do you feel about making these changes? And usually what we would hope is that somebody would create a change that is small and doable, and they're confident enough to make that change that it would be okay. It would be something that's relatively easy. We don't say easy lightly. And then what you would do is you'd have to make sure it was measurable. That's why you might say 1 bong or 1 drink less, or let's have a glass of water after each of our drinks, those sorts of things. So we're talking about harm in here, right? And then we'd be able to reflect and see how you went, how they went. Now, we understand that circumstances change, and so do stress levels, and stress can often be, I guess, something that gets in the way. But we have to make that so that that's okay, because anything between now and recovery is a good practice. So I guess MI requires non-judgmental, supportive, non-confrontational. We want to draw out and work with the ambivalence as well, particularly around change. And we'll kind of click on a little bit to change talk. All right, sounds like that's not going so well for you. What do you think that you would like to do? Listen with empathy. Remember, this work can be slow work as well, which means that you can't expect to fix someone's motivation in one go. It doesn't work like that. I think that, what time is it? We have prattled on for a good half an hour now. What other stuff do you think that you would like to know?
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yep, do it.
I've got a couple.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. That made heaps of sense, and I appreciate how you also kind of brought in that harm minimisation stuff, and you applied it to the stages of change as well, because it has to kind of, it puts a context around it rather than just thinking I can use motivational interviewing anywhere. It's like these are the stages and the ways and the opportunities. There's a couple of things. There was what I really liked about it, and you reinforced this a couple of times, is that sense of it being personal oriented. So it's not about what, I guess on that level it involves to some degree some real self-reflection and critical self-reflection on what's actually driving you to be doing the work in the first instance, but that real personal sense of care and what is going to work for this individual in front of you, not what's going to work from your perspective, not what's going to work from your organisation's policy, not what's going to work from any other position than what's this person prepared to do. And I think that's really, really powerful, but it's also really difficult. So I guess this is probably more a statement than a question. Sorry, I'm doing that thing. I'm making a statement rather than a question.
I think that too, you have to make sure that, particularly in housing services, you're seeing people who are got a lot of stresses at the moment, and change might not be their first priority, of course, but we measure things little tiny measurements. Otherwise, we all give up our job in AOD services, I tell you what. And that change could be that they come back and they're more open to you and you can have a conversation about it. Yeah. So you measure your wins in real, or not our wins, their wins in little tiny increments, because otherwise you can't think that after 1 or 2 sessions their life is going to be fixed and they're going to not using substances forever, because we're talking about people who have usually experienced a trauma, often in their childhood. This is the way that they would cope with things around them, stressful situations. It doesn't really matter why, but if you measure things in little bits, just little bits, then you're going to find that there's a lot to celebrate.
And that's almost a nice segue to my next couple of questions. So we're both around when you're talking about the pros and the cons, and you had given the example where they said that perhaps this, I can't remember what the exact example was, but it was, this isn't working for me anymore, and you kind of went into, well, why is this not working for you? What does that mean? Exploring the cons a little bit more. Would you also look at exploring what some of the positives are as well? Would you go into that a little bit deeper around, okay, so what does better health or less this or less that look like or feel like for you?
Oh, absolutely.
And that was kind of the other second part of that, is just around, does the process of creating a vision about what you're working towards have a space as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you would like to probably put together not just moving away from, but moving towards. So you're moving towards the good stuff, right? Because running away from, if you've got nowhere to run to, if you're running away from something and you've got nowhere to run to, where the hell do you go?
Yes.
So it's really, you're right, absolutely. Naomi, is if you've got something to move towards, then that will mean that your motivation changes as well. So yeah, what does not taking 2 days off work look like for you in terms of what's the impact it's got? What does not being an asshole to my partner, excuse my French, I'm not allowed to swear on this, am I?
Hey, but no rules.
No rules, all right. We do work in AOD, which means we swear a lot. I'm very sorry. When you get surrounded by it for years, you just don't you? And then, so what does not being unkind to my family member, my partner, and those sorts of things, what impact will that have? What do you want? Do you want a better relationship? Do you want to a more fulfilling time at work and those sorts of things? I think you're exactly right on that, Naomi. What are you moving towards rather than what are you moving away from?
And that was just some of the things that went through my head while you were speaking. So that's great clarification. Thank you.
Danielle, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
I don't, only because I kind of think you touched on them in that there are some things that can be done in small amounts of time, which for a lot of housing workers, that's I guess that's something that I would say is a statement, like Naomi, it feels to me like some of what you're saying too is a good place where housing case managers, not so much the drop-in service, but the case managers and the AOD workers could work more closely together, is that if you have established, some goals through your motivational interviewing or some pros and cons and some things that have been working, that be shared so that it can be reinforced.
Yeah.
I think that is the kind of thing that workers would be happy to work together on if they knew what each other were doing. And I really do think it's worthwhile sharing that kind of thing. If you've got a motivation or something that is working, that, we work together on that.
Yeah.
One of my questions is probably around, and I haven't quite articulated it in my head yet, but around how we do motivation, or if there's a space to use motivational interviewing where a decision does have to be made within a short time frame.
Yeah.
So whether there's any useful parts of it that you can take from that, like a common instance might be someone needs to make a decision whether to accept a property or not, or whether to pay their rent tomorrow or not. And we don't necessarily have time to spend a lot of time weighing that up.
Yes. So, excuse me. So with that one, I think that what you're doing is in a very short period of time, you need to accept this property. You've got a small period of time. You've been somebody who's knocked back several properties before, and we're running out of options sometimes. I'm thinking that that's possible in the land of housing or homelessness services. So what you would do then is create, because many people are caught up in the tyranny of the moment. Right? So not thinking about tomorrow, the next day, or the next day, or next week, or next year. We're thinking about right now. And right now says that I don't like this property for whatever reason, whether we think it's a good reason or we don't think it's a good reason. It's up to them what they think in terms of a good reason. So then we'd have to invite, I guess, some reflection on what it's going to look like tomorrow or next week or next year and those sorts of things. And that's around inviting that conversation rather than telling. So it would be more around, all right, so if you don't get to take this property, next week you're going to be homeless. And I know that you normally live in your car, so you'll be back in your car. If instead of doing that, if you can invite some reflection, so that might be, okay, so if you don't accept this property, there's not a lot of other options. What do you think that's going to look like for you in a week? Tell me about what the pros and cons are. So if you choose to live in this property and you don't think it's quite adequate, what does that look like? And what would the other side of the coin look like if you don't accept this property? So it's creating, I guess, some reflection in that way. So I'm not bossing anyone around anymore. I'm inviting them to come up with their own conclusions. Does that help at all?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to unmute. Absolutely. And obviously, I do think that's how a lot of workers work. But I think little tips like you've given us, like just keying in even on like trying to avoid should and rephrasing things is really helpful. I know as an assessment and planning worker, I often have 20 minutes or less with someone I've never met before, and I need to make a lot of decisions. Quite often between poor choices. They're bad either way. There's not a lot of pros on the list, you know. So those kind of little tips are really helpful as well.
Yeah. And if someone feels like you're in that journey with them rather than someone who's perhaps top down as well, because we're fixers and we're solution focused, and that's great, but sometimes it does mean that we take the role of I guess teacher or enforcer and those sorts of things, which means that it's a top down approach, which is not going to work for people. If you act like you're a school principal and you're bossing, if my school principal bossed me around, I surely wouldn't like my school principal, and I'd probably go out of my way not to do the right thing, right? So if we can create a place which is more on, I guess, equal playing fields, where you're a collaborator rather than somebody who's coming in at this angle, and it's certainly something that, because we like to look after people, right? And the way that we've learned how to look after people is by being parents and those sorts of things. And oftentimes it's like, don't touch if you touch that PowerPoint, you're going to be in trouble. But we can't do that with adults who are experiencing these sorts of things.
And what damage does that do to the relationship as well? And I mean, I guess it's also that, you know, if a choice is made, that the outcome from that or the experience of that is a negative one, then are you responsible if you made the decision, or if you put the should in there, or if you know, push
Look,
something?
we're all doing the best that we can in the resources that we've got in pretty high volume and high stress jobs. So if you can just change a little bit, maybe change the you shoulds, then that's an awesome change. And you've done a lot of, you've made, like, if you think about it, if you take out the you shoulds from every conversation that you have with people, the knock-on effect of that is going to be out of this world.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Danielle, or ask?
No, just thank you.
I think that something that we could remember too is ask people to reflect on when things did go well. So you were abstinent for a period of time. What did that look like? You did that before. That was awesome. Okay, we know that you can do it. Let's work on those strengths and that experience to make this work in the future as well. And it doesn't have to be about abstinence. It could be, all right, so you rang up the AOD service before. Like, that's awesome. You've done it before. We know that you can do it. Why don't you do it? Like, do you think that might be, not that why don't you think you could do it again, but do you think that might be something that you feel like you're confident in doing again?
And it's that it's very difficult to be objective about yourself, isn't it? So I mean, where you do have someone who's able to help identify some of those things or help you reflect on those things, then you're able to access different parts of yourself or see yourself in a different light, which probably then moves you towards different decisions or
And what might be shit though is that they might say, they never got back to me, or it was just shit. The person that I was talking to was didn't really care. I didn't get anywhere. Well, let's take it back to the positive, and that is that you made that phone call. You picked up that phone and you made that phone call, and it might not have had the outcome that you wanted, but you picked up that phone and you made that phone call, which means that you're capable of picking up a phone and making a phone call.
Awesome. Thank you.
Does that feel all right and doable, particularly for front end people that aren't, I guess, AOD specialists? Does that feel like an okay start?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I forgot to just say, do you think or could you recommend any good resource that sort of just covers the little tips that you shared today that we could put up on the Basecamp?
There is a little bit that I can share with you. I've got I think I've got a PowerPoint somewhere, but I've also got some links to some other modules, which is, for example, YSAS, and AOD service, has got a worker toolbox. And that's got stacks of stuff around what is motivational interviewing, how do you use it, and those sorts of things. And I think if you access that, then you get lots of good knowledge.
Excellent. So that's something that would you mind popping that up on Basecamp? Would that be okay? Would you?
Yeah, that's fine. Let me take a note.
Excellent.
Yeah, sure. So can you send me
All right.
I'm just conscious of time. We've probably got like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Use that by just picking up where we left off last time and having a look at the case study of Jessie. Are you okay with that, Danielle?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to share the screen
I
now.
guess the other opportunity for Danielle, though, and we'll see what she says, is
sorry.
I'm just thinking on the hop, and I know that you do so well with this, Naomi. Whether Danielle could identify things about housing which would require motivational interviewing. So we're talking about the context of drug and alcohol work, but as an IOP worker or a case manager, when you're talking about housing, does it make sense, or do you think that it will be
very useful? It should be or could be a very big part of our toolbox as workers, I think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different roles, as in AOD and housing, there's a lot of different roles and contexts. So how you might use it is different, but there's certainly a lot of situations where you might want to do motivational interviewing. Obviously, a lot of our clients have issues around their budgeting and financial issues, sometimes connected to AOD, sometimes not. And I think that's one area where you can start looking at that kind of thing. A lot of clients are very reluctant to pursue the housing options we have, which is very understandable. But sometimes I think we could do more motivational interviewing and refocusing on people's strengths of what they can achieve and what the benefits. So like a really common thing is people might come wanting government housing that we don't have and are really fixated on that and not wanting to explore private rental. And I think, and understandably, private rental is also very expensive. But motivational interviewing is a space where we can do more about, well, what are the benefits of private rental? Because there are benefits. Usually you might get a better quality property. You can have choice of location. You can, there are benefits. So those are things we can have. And also it's quite frequent, I think, in my area particularly, to get clients who go that they need supported accommodation, that they can't do things on their own. And I've even had clients who've, flown to Melbourne from interstate and then will say, well, like, I can't catch public transport. There's space is motivational interviewing to say, well, actually, you managed to get here with your kids on your own from WA and you managed to get to it. Yeah. So actually, I believe you can potentially get to that private rental inspection. Yeah. But framing that, as you've said, rather than going, you have to and you should, framing it more as the motivational interviewing of well, what do you want and how can we achieve that with what skills you already have, or what can we build on?
Yeah.
So to me, there's a lot of space and the issues are quite similar. And I also think the issues for AOD workers connect to housing, where motivational interviewing might be useful. Other things that people talked about at Making Links, like exiting detox and then going into accommodations where people are using, and being in inappropriate or insufficient accommodation for like indefinite wait times while we're waiting for better options. And that's also a space where I think we really need to promote this kind of work by all of the workers involved to keep people safe and harm in and on track while we do these things, because we can't build a house and we unfortunately can't get the government to just give us more houses straight away that we need. So helping the clients to survive and, if not thrive, during those waiting periods and transitions, I think is really important as well. That makes sense?
Yes, that's a sense.
And the idea of the visioning what people are working towards. I know in a point of crisis, no one comes to a housing service when their life's going really well, and in a lot of respects, no one comes to an AOD service when their life's going really well. So people are always going to be in that state of crisis or distress, at least. So the idea of being able to help people make different decisions and help people create a sense of what the future might be like, rather than remaining stuck and focused entirely on what's happening right now, responding to what's happening right now, I think is a really helpful aspect of motivation as well.
And unfortunately, I think possibly even more so than AOD services, I'm not sure, but possibly, I think people tend to come to homelessness services when they've exhausted all their other supports, or they don't have any other supports.
Yeah.
People might come to an AOD service and have family who want to help them and want to support them. But oftentimes, if people had any of that, they wouldn't be at a homelessness service. Not always, but it is the case that oftentimes people are very alone. So being able to work with them about the self-motivation, I think is really important.
Yeah, great. So clearly lots of opportunities to be using. And I think, even in some of the crisis accommodation centres, where you do have people who are probably not supposed to be using, but probably still are using within those services, the repeated kind of opportunities of seeing people, brief opportunities of seeing people, gives you that chance to start to do some of that really brief motivation feeling as well. That as I think the movement shifts over time, those incremental shifts are going to lead to something, as opposed to that one sit down 1 hour counselling session with someone that's going to change the world. It's not. It's those gradual processes and those gradual conversations and that gradual shift in thinking that will really lead to a long-term change.
Yeah, and there's also some really good training that's available, and I don't know how widely it's available to housing services, but there's you can do a day or 2 days on motivational interviewing, which is a wonderful thing to do. And if your organisation is committed to it, they could buy it in fairly cheaply, I think, as well. But there's other opportunities as well, and it's certainly worthwhile.
Excellent. I'm conscious that we probably don't have time now to look at the case study, which is not a problem, but we still have a couple more weeks left to review them. But if there's any other comments that anyone would like to make about.
Does Vicky have questions? She's still on mute.
Is Vicky with us? Yeah, I think she is.
You might have walked away from
yes. We put her on the spot.
Hello?
Here we go. Hello.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay, so this is my first time on this. I'm like trying to find my buttons and they're right in front of me. I don't really have any questions, but I'd just like to say, Olivia, you'd be a really great trainer. Like, this is stuff that we've gone through with the students, and it was very interesting. And as a past client from the services, what you actually touched on made a lot of sense. And basically, I didn't sit there and say, oh, yeah, what a load of crock. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. And I think it's great that, that you're sharing this information, and the fact that we have, you're talking about collaborating a lot. And I think that's very important as well for a lot of service workers. And Danielle, you also mentioned about, workers that are actually practicing this and using motivational interviewing. And if they do see that, they've got evidence there that it's worked, to, share it. I think that's really, really important and valid points that you made. I think there'd be less clients falling through the gaps if more workers do come on board and do share that knowledge. Yeah, so, I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You're welcome. Cool. Well, I think that's us for today. That's us for this week 4 session. If people are interested, Danielle will be coming back on in about 4 minutes on the separate link that I have sent to you to have a look at filling out an IAP. So, and this recording will also be put up on Basecamp as well for anyone who wants to access it after today.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Olivia, for your time and expertise and sharing that. Thank you, Vicky, for your comments. Thank you, Danielle, also for your additional comments and input as well, which will be helpful. But otherwise, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Cool.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.